How do you build a high-performing culture? This is Culture Architects. Candid conversations with extraordinary leaders sharing their biggest successes, failures, and lessons learned on their culture journeys. Here's David J. Friedman.
So last December, I was over at the House of Bricks podcast to talk about all things CultureWise with Adam House, who's our guest today. Adam is a serial entrepreneur. He's got over 20 years of experience in successfully launching, scaling, and actually exiting companies as well. He's built his career across a lot of different industries, including e-commerce, mobile technology, healthcare analytics, executive coaching, and believe it or not, he was even a professional basketball player. He was with the Rochester Razor Sharks from New York. Today, we're going to have him on the Culture Architects podcast, and we're excited to talk culture and culture building from his pretty unique perspective. So, Adam, glad to sit down with you again, and welcome to Culture Architects.
Thanks for having me on the show. It's great to be here.
It's glad to have you. So, I want to go back 20, 25 years ago. How did you get started? I mean, you were a basketball player. How did you get started on the entrepreneurial path? And how did you come to become this serial, as we call it, entrepreneur?
Well, it's not your typical path. So I was sitting in college as a freshman, and I was looking at the professor. And of course, at 19, you know everything, right? And I was looking at him, and I'm listening to him, and I'm saying, this guy's making $70,000 a year. And he doesn't look very happy. And if he's teaching me where I'm supposed to go, that's not where I want to end up. And so I dropped out of college after my freshman year, moved down to Florida, literally started my first business with a couple $100, turned it into a multi-million-dollar business, exited that in 2007. And then, as you mentioned, had multiple business that I started after that.
So what was that first business that you got into in Florida?
I was a direct marketing business. We were doing lead generation for mortgage companies. So I've had a history of being in the right time at the right place. And in 1999, we were really riding the refinance wave, and mortgage companies were exploding. The refinancing was, going on through the roof. And fortunately, in 2007, so there was some rumblings about the mortgage market collapsing. And I had a company reach out to me and said, hey, we want to buy you. And we hit our numbers in January, February, March, April. Finally, the CEO calls me and he's like, all right, let's do the deal. So he buys the company. And we literally went like this from 1990 to 2007. And then in May of 2007, I sold the business. It just went from excellent to non-existent.
Wow. But it's still, so you're 19 years old. You moved to Florida. Like most 19-year-olds that move to Florida are sitting on the beach. They're not sitting there saying, I think I'll start a business. What is it that caused you to say, I can start a business? Like, that's not a normal thing for a 19-year-old.
Well, I always tell people, get around people that you want to be like. Find a mentor, find someone that you're aspiring to be like. And in high school, I had the honor of working for Dan Gilbert, founder of Rocket Mortgage, owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers. But at the time, it was called Rock Financial, and they had maybe 70 or 80 employees. But I was in the incubator of watching him build, cast vision, test, fail, learn, grow, model. And I just fell in love with it. It fed my competitive edge of being an athlete, because in business, you're competing every day. Either you're winning business or losing business. And you have to constantly reinvent yourself, innovate, and that's how you stay competitive in the marketplace.
And so you're a 19-year-old, you start up this company. Was it just you? How'd you hire your first people?
Well, I started out of my apartment. So I had a 2-bedroom apartment. One bedroom I slept in, and the other one I set up a little war room for myself. So I had literally 4 different extensions set up. So I was sales, I was marketing. I'd have an upset customer and be like, you want to talk to my boss? No problem. I transfer it to myself. Yeah, this is Mike. Yeah, okay, we'll help you. So it was everything you could imagine of starting a business, and just started grow the business. And it was easy to attract talent because we were growing. The business was growing, right opportunity, and we could pay our salespeople a lot of money, and they were very attracted to that.
And so when you sold the company, how many employees were there?
There were 20 team members at the time. So it was, small company compared to some of the other ones I've run, but we were super cash flow positive, and it was a great environment and great company.
So you sold that company at the right time. What's next?
What's next is I met someone that wanted to develop iPhone apps. So at the time, smartphones were just coming onto the market, and I just was kind of going through the experience of I don't see people wanting to download all of these apps. They're consistently accessing the internet through their desktop, and you'd go out and you'd buy this $1,000 iPhone, and then you'd go to a website and it was designed for a desktop size screen. So my mind's running of how do we make the same experience on a mobile device that people are getting on their desktop? So that business, we were 18 months idea to exit. So I sold it for 30 times revenue to Akamai Technologies, which is a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And that was 18 months idea to exit. So again, right time, right place.
So where's the basketball thing in this?
Glad you asked. And it's actually after those two businesses. So
Okay.
we sold.
For our audience, You're getting the sense that this is a different kind of story than normal, but go ahead.
Yeah, this isn't your normal
This is not the normal path.
Yeah. So I'm 32. I sold, again, the company to Akamai. We had to move to Boston to do a year earnout. And I'm standing in the kitchen. And as an entrepreneur and CEO, you love to delegate things, right? So I didn't have anyone to delegate to other than my wife. And just word of advice, if you take one thing from this episode, do not delegate tasks to your wife. So I was standing in the kitchen. I was able to dodge the pan that she tossed at me when I told her it was time to reorganize the DVDs. And of course, I wasn't going to do it. She was. And she said, listen, you've been a CEO since you were 19. If you don't do something you love, you're going to regret it the rest of your life. And so I played basketball in high school, college for a year. And I said, well, I'm sure if I put the effort into it, I could probably make a minor league basketball team somewhere. And she's like, yeah, whatever keeps you out of the house. I don't care if you're a barista at Starbucks, but you got to get out of here. So for 6 months, I trained. I had a nutrition coach, strength coach, skills coach, trained for 6 months, ended up getting invited to a combine in Dayton, Ohio. And I show up, right? I'm 32, 6-foot white guy. And you've got all these, and I call them kids. They're 22, 23-year-olds that played mid-major D1 basketball. Some had played professionally in Europe. And in walks me, and ended up, there were 34 players there. They invited 3 to the camp in Rochester. So for some reason, the coach saw something in me that he liked, invited me to camp, and there were 25 guys at the camp, and I ended up making the team. So imagine this phone call while this is going on. My wife is in Brookline remodeling this 1920s Victorian style house overlooking the city. And I call her and I said, great news, I made the team. The bad news is we're moving to Rochester, New York.
Okay.
So
that was, I'm sure, a big hit.
Yeah, it was. She's a trooper. We've moved 22 times since we've been married in 20 years, but moved to Rochester. And then, and try not to talk too much, but I am the guest. I'm used to being the host.
Sure.
So when I got there, the guys on the team were kind of wondering, like, who is this guy with no basketball resume? What's he doing here? And so they looked me up on the internet and they see my business background, sold this company, sold that company. And so word ended up getting out to coach and the owner. And after practice one day, the owner calls me and he's like, Adam, what are you doing the rest of the day? Practice is only an hour and a half. Like, what are you doing? I was like, oh, I hang out with my 3 kids. I had 3 young boys at the time. I have 4 boys now. He's like, why don't you come in and help me run the team? I'll make you CEO and co-owner. So I was able to live a lifelong dream of playing professional basketball, being co-owner and CEO. And then I also helped them land some major sponsorships with Nike. So player, co-owner, CEO. And everyone was like, well, did you buy your minutes? And there's an interview out there of the coach. He's an old school Philly guy, boxer, old school. And he's like, on TV, he's like, Adam can't buy minutes from me. I don't care if he owns a team. I don't care who he is. He's got to earn every minute he gets. So I ended up getting some minutes towards the end of the season, but it was a great experience to live a lifelong dream and have my wife and kids sitting courtside while I'm playing in a minor league basketball game.
That's pretty incredible. So let's go back to your first entrepreneurial experiences. And I'm curious, as we dive into the culture aspect of this. So where did you first begin to see that culture was pretty important to the organization's success? How did that occur to you?
This is where I believe athletics and business there's such a direct parallel between the two, because in basketball, you have your point guard, your shooting guard, small forward, power forward, and a center. And if you can't get the music right, then you're not going to be successful as a team. So at the time, I really led. A lot of leaders will try to lead from top down. But what I realized is, and especially being a young CEO, so I had people that were in their 40s working for me, that I had to lead bottom up. I had to do all of the things that I expected them to do, and I was very open to input. So even if the ideas were similar to the ones that I had, if they came from them, they had more buy-in to the actual vision that we were trying to create. So ultimately, it was my decision as the leader where we went, but the more collective your vision can be, the more buy-in you get from your team.
And so in that first company, were there certain things that you did you're pretty young, you didn't know what you were doing probably to a great extent, but as you look back, maybe perhaps in retrospect, are there things that you either did to start to build a culture in that company, or perhaps missed out on that now if you were saying, well, if I could do that over again, here's how I might do that differently?
Well, I compliment my leadership style then, but I also have grown a lot in my maturity. So at the time, if there was ever anything outside of our culture, I would address it head on. Hey, that doesn't fit here, you're out. And I had no problem firing people. In fact, one of the things I coach people even today is fire fast enough, because there's never a time when you let someone go that people were like, oh, wow, I'm so surprised that guy got fired. They're all thinking it like, why didn't you fire the guy 3 months ago?
And we're usually saying to ourselves, I should have done it a long time ago.
Yeah, there's never been a regretful termination in my career. And so what I would do is really just set a precedent. First one in the office, last one to leave. I didn't know what a weekend was. I got my most productive work done. You can actually work on Saturday and Sunday instead of being responsive as you are during the week. But really, the first step was leading by example. It was self-leadership and doing all of the things that I expected them to do. I would do it at a higher level.
And so where, if ever, in your career, somewhere in those early days, and I see this typically, and you do lots of coaching with CEOs, so I'm sure you see this as well. One of the things that I observe is that most leaders at an early stage of their development as leaders are mostly, as you're describing, leading by example. I try to set the right example. People are around me. They see me. They figure out this is how we do things around here. And yet, I would say, and I've said this to many leaders, that to think that that's enough, that they're just going to watch me and figure it out is, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, it's a bit naive. That certainly, as you've seen with companies you've helped to scale, that as the company grows and it gets bigger and there's more and more people or multiple locations or people perhaps working remotely, they're not seeing the leader all the time. Right. And so somewhere we have to do more to institutionalize the culture we want than only lead by example. We have to start by leading by example. So where in your career did you first begin to, for lack of a better word, I'll say document, memorialize? Well, what is the culture we want to have in this organization beyond simply setting a good example? When did that start to happen for you?
Well, I wish I would have heard your talk that you gave at Vistage much earlier in my career, because I was one of those guys with the successory signs and had the whatever key phrases there were on those. So maybe that was just the time in which I was a leader. It was very, very
It was popular then.
Yeah.
Yes.
But you make a great point. It doesn't scale. And so as the business grew, people weren't seeing me as often. And so what I would do is spend as much time with my leaders as I could to invest in them. And then I had to get comfortable with delegating and being able to allow people to make mistakes. So I hold myself to a very high standard, and I've learned to grow, and failure is a growth opportunity. So there is no failing, it's just learning. And the more you empower other people, the more they learn, and the more that your culture can really spread in a bigger organization.
Can you think of, in your experience over these numbers of companies that you've run, and I want to get eventually to, okay, now you're coaching others and how you're seeing things differently, but let's stay with the companies you've built and run. So I'm curious about, were there things in those, I'm sure there were, that you look back and you say, boy, I really learned my lesson there. That was something stupid that I did from an organizational building standpoint, not necessarily a strategic standpoint, but something that, you know, your smarter self today looks back and says, man, had I only known that. What did you learn along the way about culture building?
Well, I'm going to tell you a story, and probably one of my worst leadership moments. So I had two sales guys that were consistently late to every sales meeting, and they were top producers. And I think I was 23 at the time. And this happens in sports too, where a coach will just lay into somebody. And so they walked into the sales meeting late, and I stopped the meeting. I stood up and I said, you know what, guys, if you want to act like children, I'm going to treat you like children. So I want you to go outside, sit in the hall, and face the wall until this sales meeting is over. And fortunately, I had the golden handcuffs at the time. They were making six figures, and they were young kids too. But just that type of leadership style, being young and making a lot of money, sometimes you get over your ski tips and your authority. And so that was probably my worst leadership moment. But what I learned from that is just the power of your words as a leader, the impact you can make. And so it's really helped me throttle whenever I want to go over the top on someone, it's getting them to see their mistakes, own their mistakes, and want to make the change to be a part of the company, or they don't, and they're not going to be here. So just giving them that opportunity.
Yeah, it's interesting from a coaching standpoint. I talk about this often when we talk about coaching. Again, I know you're a coach as well, that when you can help others to see from their own perspective what they're doing wrong or what they need to do differently, they own it in a much more powerful way, certainly, than you just telling them this is what you did wrong or this is what you need to do differently. When they can see it, they own it completely differently.
Yeah, I wish I had teenagers at the time too. I would have been a much better leader. So you learn a lot from trying to raise your own kids.
Yeah, this is true. And so of the companies that you've run, which company do you think had the best culture, and what did you do to make that happen?
I would say Velocitude, the mobile technology company. We were just buzzing, disrupting an industry, changing the most impactful device that's ever been invented. Our strategy. So we were going after the top Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies. And we were this startup in South Florida, had 10, 12 engineers, but we were able to present our product in a way that we were able to land our first 15 accounts. 13 of them were either top 100 internet retailers or Fortune 500 companies. And that's actually what led Akamai to buying us, because these were all their customers, and they're trying to enter the mobile space. And they're like, wait a minute, who's this company down there? So we were just all bought in to disrupting an industry. We had a war room for the engineers. They would be up all night. It was just a great time. I think just having everyone bought into really changing the way people, like I said, use the most impactful device ever created. We were just all bought in.
And so certainly a hallmark of great cultures is this sense of being, I'll use your phrase, bought in, that people are aligned around what we're trying to do. They have some commitment. They have some level of passion around that. So is there anything you did then, or what have you learned about how do you get a group of people to be bought in?
Well, one of the things I would tell them is every customer, every time, no excuses, no exceptions. So if we're trying to land Fortune 500 companies, they want us to be there on Friday with the website built already, which my CTO wasn't a fan. We'd walk into these meetings and the client would be like, "Oh, can you guys do this?" I'd be like, "Yes, no problem." And I look over at him because he's thinking he's got to build it all. So he just, turned red and started to sweat. And so I think obsession with the customer was one of the main driving things that got everyone really moving together.
So this concludes the first part of my interview with Adam House Sr., serial entrepreneur, executive coach, and professional growth expert. In the second half of our conversation, Adam and I are going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to shift from his entrepreneurial ventures to his experiences in executive coaching. And we'll talk about plans for the future, especially when it comes to building the cultures of future businesses.
This has been Culture Architects with David J. Friedman. Join us next time for more insights and wisdom from great leaders in all walks of life. To book David for your next event or to learn more about his writing, speaking, or consulting, go to davidjfriedman.com. Culture Architects with David J. Friedman is a production of CultureWise.